I'm not a climate scientist. They are not a climate scientist, but they're interested in it and they want to protect the data around it, kind of. Hello, Nathan here for Measured Light, and welcome to my first ever climate news reaction video. Maybe you're asking yourself, what the hell is a climate news reaction? And the answer is, I don't know either. However, I really love music reaction videos on YouTube, specifically the channels of The Charismatic Voice, Stevie Knight, and The Third Ernest. So I wanted to take their approach to making content and apply it to my journey of learning more about climate change and sustainability. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and tell the YouTube robots to do their thing. And if you have any climate news you think I should react to, make sure to put it in the comments below. With that said, let's get right into the first video. The first ever video we're gonna be doing is Shepard Smith. I know we're starting off with a good one because there's been a lot happening with Shepard Smith over the last couple of years where he's gone from being on Fox News and moving over to CNBC. It's almost like he's changed political parties. So let's hop right in and see what he has to say.
Heat waves are getting stronger, floods are growing larger, wildfires are obliterating more of America's landscape. It's because of climate change.
It's because of climate change. Cue the video.
Our burning of fossil fuels is damaging planet Earth, and the time to stop it is running out. By the end of the century, climate change could shrink the U.S. economy by hundreds of billions of dollars. That is the warning in a new report released on Friday ahead of schedule.
Okay, let's just stop there for a second and say a couple of different things. One, there's really eerie music, and so I always think it's strange when they take these things and turn them into something even more doom and gloom than is reality. And secondly, I do think it's an interesting approach that he's going straight into money. I think whenever we talk about people's pocketbooks or think about how individuals are going to be impacted directly by climate change, then that starts to trigger, like what's important, the primal kind of impacts in our reptilian mind. And it goes, okay, what's important to us? Oh, our pocketbooks matter a lot. And so that's how they're trying to like pull it in. Let's show you this terrible disaster environmental thing. Oh, but money.
By the Trump administration. The government report has found that climate change has doubled the destruction from wildfires in the American Southwest and heavy rain in the decades to come. According to this new government report, rising seas and storms could force tens of millions of Americans to move within the next century. And that's
Okay, so I'm going to stop there just for a second because over the last year I've done a ton of research on domestic migration and thinking about the different impacts that specifically on the United States that will happen as environments start to change and as weather patterns start to change, and where does that force people to move, and then how do they invest their money in ways that they like have to find new work or find new communities to be a part of. And so I think that's just really another really interesting point. I don't know what this segment is from. It is from Fox News, but I don't know exactly what it's from. Again, I'm just realizing too that this has been appropriated by the Bernie Sanders channel, and they have this weird like military kind of Bernie Sanders in Vermont logo on it. And so this content is one that's been taken from a conservative news channel and is being used and distributed by one of the most liberal politicians in the United States. So I think that's an interesting approach. I'm even more curious now why they would have added the doom and gloom. I'm also starting to wonder what was edited in. Did they edit in any of this footage post? Like, so was this on the news and Shepard had it one way, and then the Bernie Sanders team decided, oh, we're going to add some videos of this or this in. And so it's really hard to know what's happening here when those things come together. But I think that the domestic migration part, the checkbooks part, this kind of like personalization of climate change is really a very strong move when you're trying to get people to think deeply about the ideas, or you're trying to convince them to change their approaches or their concepts of what climate change is all about.
Some coastal cities are already seeing the effects. The report also predicts extreme heat waves will get much worse, and that cities including Phoenix could have blistering triple-digit temps 150 days out of the year by the end of this century.
Wow.
The climate science is accepted science. Governments across the nation are spending billions of dollars preparing
Every
for what
government
is to
except
come.
ours.
The U.S. military, too. Billions of dollars. This is not a...
Right, just real quickly, that's a really interesting thing. He just slips in there. Even though this video is old, he was already thinking about national security. There's a big movement happening with the idea that climate change is a national security issue. I even saw a video of Boris Johnson at the UN last week talking about that. And so I think that it's interesting that even back then, when Shep was on Fox News, he was thinking about that. So I think that's really interesting.
Political issue. It's science. But some have made it political, especially Republicans. And as a result, a lot of folks have missed this report. It was dropped, as I said, ahead of schedule on Black Friday, when a lot of Americans were busy shopping, eating Thanksgiving leftovers, and spending time with the family. But it's extremely important.
Oh, look, so we're going to stop it there just on that screen where, again, it's this weird Bernie Sanders-like logo. Okay, that's a short video. It hits a couple of interesting points. However, I think that it's a good approach. I think that when we think about how to talk to people who maybe are climate deniers or people who don't think that climate change has an impact on them, I think it's really important to think about strategies that are really personal, narratives that are really personal to them as we think about how those things come together. So I think it was a really interesting first video. We're going to jump right into the next one. The next video, I maybe have seen this video before, but I don't actually know the answer to that. I've watched a lot of Michael Mann videos in the past, and so I'll be interested to see if this is one I've seen before.
So if the models are so much better now, what do they say about the next 10, 20, 30 years?
So there's a little bit of good news. In the old days,
Michael Mann is always an optimist.
We use the models to study human-caused climate change by treating carbon dioxide levels as if they're a knob. You just turn up the carbon dioxide knob and you see how the climate responds. But that's not how the real world works. In the real world, it isn't a knob. We put carbon into the atmosphere. The oceans can take up some of that carbon. The plants can take up some of that carbon. So a more...
So yeah, he's talking about carbon sequestration. Oh, I can't even say the word, sequestration. So he's talking about how the world will naturally take carbon from the air and process it through its natural functions, through plants or through the ocean. As the ocean churns, it can actually process quite a lot of carbon. I'm not a climate scientist. Michael Mann is a climate scientist. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Realistic, more comprehensive model includes the so-called carbon cycle. We allow those components of the climate system to interact. And when they do that, here's the bit of good news. What they tell us is how much warming we're committed to now is mostly a function of how much carbon we've burned up to now. Now, in the older experiments, the models suggested that even if we stopped burning carbon now, because of just the thermal inertia of the oceans, they can absorb so much heat, they would continue to warm up for decades. That's bad. Because of the more sophisticated experiments we can do, we can see now that no, if you stop burning carbon right now, the ocean increases the amount that it's taking out of the atmosphere. The vegetation increases the amount.
Okay, so this is interesting. Yeah, so there's been some science in the past that has suggested that if we stopped all of our activity, all human activity today, we burned no more fossil fuels, we created no more carbon emissions of any kind, that we would continue to have global warming for decades, if not like hundreds of years. And so I know that there have been several different models that have come out in different books, specific in Gernot Wagner's Climate Shock book. I think there's a scientist in that book that suggests that it would be at least 100 years before you would even see a flattening out, because the escalation of the carbon that we've put into the world today would continue to increase the global temperature. So what Michael Mann here is starting off by saying is that these models have been updated. They are now taking in more sophisticated attributes of what's happening on the planet and how the planet processes carbon, and that maybe that isn't exactly true. Also, watching this, I know I haven't seen this video, even though it came out in October of 2020. I don't think I've seen this video because I think I would remember this. So, okay, let's go.
That it's taking out of the atmosphere. And so temperatures remain pretty much flat. We are only committed to the warming that has happened already. If we stop burning carbon now, we stop the warming of the planet. In a sense, that is empowering. It tells us we can have a real impact.
So you're saying this is reversible?
So reversible is an even bolder proposition. And it is reversible, but then we're talking about, can we bring...
Okay, he's going to get into how it's reversible, but let's just talk about that body language for just a second. He's basically like, it is reversible, but is it really what I think is going to happen? Yeah, so that's hilarious. Yeah, his body language is like, do I really want to be on national television and on the internet forevermore saying that this is reversible based on our current behaviors? So let's see what he has to say to follow up to that, but I get his hesitancy.
The thermostat back down, not just keep temperatures where they are, but actually bring it down. The models tell us we can do that, but to do that, we have to not only stop burning fossil fuels, we actually have to suck some of that carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere. And 20, 30 years from now, we might be able to do that. We've never failed.
Okay, so he started talking there about carbon capture and sequestration. So carbon capture, there's a bunch of different technologies that talk about different ways to do carbon capture. Some of that might include like capturing carbon from the air and pumping it down to the ground, or as we have manufacturing or fuel production processes, we capture the carbon directly and then we put it into the ground, or we put it into the ocean, or we put it into concrete, or we do all of these different things. A great example of that is Carbon Engineering, which is a company that is based in Canada that I think that Bill Gates or Microsoft was one of the first venture capitalists, one of the first investors in it. And so they actually think they can capture carbon out of the air using these big fans. Maybe I'll add a picture here or wherever. There, I'll add a picture. And we will see that, it's these big giant fans, and the big fans suck all the air through, and as they filter through, they suck out the carbon, then they take the carbon and they turn it into fuel, or they turn it into, some other raw material. So that's the kind of thing that he's talking about here. And it's a technology that is theoretically possible, but not yet proven in practice. I know that there's an experiment in Iceland where they were able to mineralize CO2 in the ground. And so there are some examples of it kind of starting to happen. But his approach, or his thinking about it here, is really smart, because it's not likely to happen on a mass scale, on a global scale, and on a scale that would actually help us reduce enough carbon from the air to reduce the Earth's temperature.
As a society, to come up with ingenious technical achievements down the road. We can't do that now. In decades from now, we might be able to do that. So the critical thing now is to stop turning the thermostat up. We can do that. And with the right technology and deploying that technology, then we can actually bring the thermostat down. But we've got to stop warming first. We've got to do what we can now and not rely on technology that's currently unproven and we can't rely on to get us where we need to go.
Well, I think that Michael Mann's approach there in talking about this is really smart. It's optimistic, yet cautious. It's conservative, and it requires that there are a bunch of things happening simultaneously. I really like that approach. I like Michael Mann's work in general, but at the same time, to be a scientist and then to be somebody who's out there being a spokesperson are really different things. So his awareness and his cautiousness in both being a scientist and coming on to 60 Minutes and doing that in such a meaningful way, I think is really great. So with that, let's get into our third and final video and the first ever climate news reaction video, and that is about Facebook and climate change policy at Facebook. I don't know what this video is exactly, but I'm interested to see what Facebook is saying about climate change at this point, so let's get in there.
Facebook announced Thursday it will add a new section to its expanding climate change information hub to combat the spread of misinformation related to global climate change, further embracing its role as an arbiter of truth, which founder Mark Zuckerberg has long claimed was not the company's job. The newly added section will feature current and specific facts, including data related to polar bear populations declining due to global warming, that debunk common climate myths, the social media company proclaimed.
So I didn't realize this is like a robot voice reading a report. This was posted by Forbes YouTube channel. So maybe what it was is that they wrote out an article and then they just basically turned on this robot to read the written article. I didn't know that was a thing. And I just realized it because there was something that it said. It was like, wah, 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 wah. And so I was like, okay, let's figure out what's going on here. So this starts off by basically saying that, Zuckerberg doesn't want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth. I think that's basically what I was just saying that they generally, end up being. This gets a lot into Section 230. President Trump at the end of his reign was thinking a lot about the Decency Act and how Section 230 really impacted or limited his capacities in some ways. And so he wanted to change that. And so we saw that in the news a little bit. And, I think it's interesting. We'll see kind of what comes of this. But, websites like Facebook or platforms like Facebook's, they want to say that they're not responsible for the content, that they're not curating the content. But the reality is that their algorithms actually are curating the content for you. And so they do have a responsibility to managing that. This is not a climate issue, but one that I'm thinking about anyways. So, all right, let's get back in here and see what else he has to say.
Claimed in a statement. Experts from George Mason University, the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and the University of Cambridge will oversee the program. Its Climate Science Information Center aims to connect people with science-based news, approachable information, and actionable resources.
Okay, so what they're saying there is that George Mason University, the Yale communications team, and the University of Cambridge are going to be the team responsible for helping Facebook manage the content or manage what is being identified as climate change news. I suspect what they're trying to do is they're trying to limit false news or fake news around climate change, and they may be also trying to promote climate news that is specifically good for disseminating information about what's happening with climate change. That's interesting. I think it's an interesting approach. It's one of those where they can be a little more hands-off and say we aren't the curators of the content, these organizations are the curators of the content, and that they know what they're talking about. It's much like me. I'm not a climate scientist, they are not a climate scientist, but they're interested in it and they want to protect the data around it. Kind of. So it'll be interesting to see how they sell ads or how they sell content specific to this climate news hub that they're talking about.
Facebook will start adding information labels to climate change posts that direct people to its information hub. That hub is available in France, Germany, the UK, and the US, and is being expanded
Someone
to
missed a
Belgium,
comma there.
Brazil,
France,
Canada,
Germany is not a country.
India, Indonesia, Ireland, Mexico, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Spain, South Africa, and Taiwan. The spread of damaging falsehoods endangers the level of international cooperation required to prevent catastrophic global warming, said Dr. Sander van der Linden, University of Cambridge. Facebook is in a unique position to counter the circulation of online misinformation, and the new climate myth-busting section is an important step toward debunking dangerous falsehoods. Early last year, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said he didn't believe social networks should be responsible for fact-checking politicians. I don't think that Facebook or internet platforms, in general, should be arbiters of truth, Zuckerberg told CNBC last May. However, last summer, the company began rolling out information hubs to confront the dissemination of misinformation on its.
So just real quickly, I'm wondering what he thinks is happening politically that he suddenly needs to change what Facebook is doing. If he believed this so purely and didn't want to do anything to change the Facebook's behavior in the past, what has changed? Why all of a sudden would they be adding caution labels or removing content that they didn't feel was disseminating correct information? I'm so curious what he thinks has changed either within the world, in the political atmosphere, or within Facebook itself, that suddenly they're going to go, okay, we're going to invest millions and millions of dollars into making this change. It leads me to believe something else is happening that isn't being talked about in this piece, or something else is happening in the background politically that I'm not so aware of.
Platform. In August, Facebook launched a voting information center to give Americans the tools and information they need to make their voices heard at the ballot box. Earlier this month, the company announced it would run the largest worldwide campaign to promote authoritative information about COVID-19 vaccines and remove false claims about vaccines.
Okay, so that's interesting. They're basically just saying, look, we've already taken this technique or this methodology and started to apply it to other subject matter areas, and so we're going to do it here as well. All right, we made it through our first ever climate news reaction video. That was a lot of fun, and if you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. And if you made it this far, consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification so that you'll learn about all of the new content that's coming out. Thanks again, and see you next time on Measured Light.